The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Okay, so I have been waiting to get back behind the microphone with you because what the heck is going on with the UCP? I have seen such sketchy stuff come across my email lately, and a lot of it sounds benign, which is what the UCP want you to think. But it's not. So today on our list, a whole bunch of stuff that sounds boring, that sounds innocuous, but it's not. The UCP blows up the board that invests public sector pensions in Alberta and our Heritage Savings Trust funds and puts a politician in charge. Next, the UCP inserts themselves in professional bodies. Doctors, lawyers, and other professions have been given the privilege of governing themselves, but now politicians think they know better. And what sparked this intervention may surprise you, or it may not. And finally, I am worried there's some gerrymandering going on, a new bill that would allow the Boundaries Commission to completely ignore city limits when they redraw the boundaries. Why should you care? Because mushing city seats and rural seats together gives the UCP a much better chance at re-election.
Well, Cheryl, in that time, I built you a little tinfoil hat that you can wear with all of your conspiracy theories that are coming out. I can't wait to dive into all this today, but maybe let's start with AIMCo. And for those that don't know, it's Alberta Investment Management Company that was founded in 2000 or started by government in 2008. And I will start off by saying I would have thought you liked this one, Miss Lover of Crown Corps. But anyway, let me get to you had a novel. Let me get to my point. So last week, the government announced that it will be firing the entire board of AIMCo. It's the arm's length governing body that is responsible for looking after public sector pensions and the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. And it's about worth a combined $170 billion with a B dollars. So the government, during that announcement, released a press release saying, Alberta's government has decided to reset the investment corporation's focus. On November 7th, Alberta's government rescinded all board appointments and reappointments and appointed the President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, Nate Horner, as the sole director and chair of AIMCo until a new board chair is appointed within 30 days. Ray Gilmore, and that is the now former Deputy Minister for Executive Council, so he kind of is the boss of all the deputy ministers, is appointed and will serve to further stabilize operations and ensure smooth operations during the transition period. So now that I've read a news release to catch up with your lengthy intro, where do you want to go with this?
Okay, so first, why would I like this?
Because you love Crown Corps and you love all the things where government is, it's big government. It's big government right there.
Okay, well, none of that has changed. The only thing that's changed here is that the body that is meant to be arm's length, meant not to be political because these are the long-term retirement investments of Albertans, has now become the sole discretion of one politician with absolutely no experience.
Okay, so
managing any of this.
When I read this, at first I was like, what the actual fuck? This is weird. Because I did look and, you have an interim politician coming in. You have interim CEO, which I suspect Ray is quite a competent individual. And I don't know why you'd have an interim if he's capable of being CEO for some stability, but I digress on the interim titles. I thought that. And then I looked at maybe OC's expiring, a board appointment. And so I think the one point I want to make first is this isn't new. So where my criticism of the government is that it looks like they're knee-jerking response to replacing a board, et cetera. But when it comes to so we can get into my criticisms, but I think the biggest thing is AIMCo hasn't been working for a while, probably about a decade. And we've seen the decrease in what's been managed here. We're seeing an increase in operational funding. We've seen, just general mismanagement, not reaching the mandate of what AIMCo was set out to do. So by all means, I would fire my financial planner if he was doing this job I think it's fair to fire AIMCo. They weren't doing it. They weren't getting returns. As an Albertan, this is my money and you're mismanaging it.
That's not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue isn't whether the board deserved to be fired. The issue is, should a politician be in charge of Albertans' long-term retirement investments and the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund? Because the difference is, it's impossible. It is absolutely impossible for a politician not to be motivated by a 4-year cycle, by getting reelected in 2027. And so to put that person in charge of something that shouldn't be viewed as what that can be accomplished within a 4-year cycle, this is people's retirement investments, and it is also the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. It is such a conflict of interest. That is exactly why this body is arm's length from the government. So to say, it's not an issue to say fire the board. The issue is to say, and today we're going to make the finance minister in charge of everything.
Okay, so that's a 30-day appointment with commitment. It's also commitment he won't take compensation, also commitment that he won't make any decisions. So, but and he's not making any changes. So right now it is to get the toxicity, I would call it, out, the people that have mismanaged this under your government, like when the NDP was in, under Kenny, under Redford. I do. I mean, we don't have a new chair, and I know there's speculation of who this new chair is going to be. You're hearing the rumor mill. Well, I read in the Western Standard that there was speculation that former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was asked. I don't know if I think he's See,
again, not a political appointment at all.
But I mean, you. What I would say is, if he is, I mean, you can't argue that the man can't manage funds, that he doesn't know how economics works. He's an economist, for goodness sakes. So I don't think he's going to take it. I don't know. I don't know him very well, but I know he's got some other things going on. If he does, so be it. We can have that conversation when it comes. If the government doesn't appoint someone in 30 days, I get your argument, Cheryl. I get the fact that this government has also walked themselves into another narrative of like, fire the board, give political power. However, I would say as an Albertan, and I think why we didn't see a lot of news stories and news coverage on this is because most people looked and was like, yeah, AIMCo's kind of shit in the bed. They're not really doing what they're supposed to do. Could government, what would Erica do? Maybe this is a new segment. WWED.
Let's hope not.
I'm here all day, folks. I'm making this a new segment. But that, like, the government should have probably preconditioned this 6 months ago. This is not a new issue and said and given notice.
Problem. If it's not a new issue, then line up an interim person that is not the finance minister. Like, this is not the first time a board has had to be fired in the history of the government of Alberta. This isn't even the first time in this government's time that the board of AIMCo has had to be fired. So, like, line up an interim person that is not a politician.
And what I would say to that is that's where I was like, what the actual fuck? Why is it a politician for
another
it's for
segment.
30 days? I'm just really ringing them off today. And I think that that's a fair point if it wasn't for 30 days. But my suspicion is if you looked at the timing of the OCs, the chair hadn't committed, or whomever the chair shall be, in that time. So what would you do then? Just like tread water and keep
here's the other,
no one?
Well, appoint someone. It's not like there's no one who is capable, and certainly more capable, of doing an interim job.
So, like, do you appoint like the deputy minister? Like, how would you do that even on an interim? Like, does Kate White become that so that there's a bureaucrat?
Erica,
like, I don't know how
every
you
single
solve it.
example would have been better than the current situation. And the other thing that makes me
wonder,
what
would Cheryl do?
Not appoint the finance minister as the head of AIMCo. The other thing is that, like, we're calling this stabilization, which is absolutely not. Like, to put out a press release and say we're stabilizing AIMCo by firing everybody that works for the board and the CEO of AIMCo, and we're appointing the minister. That is not stabilization as a starter. But the other thing that I'm worried about is that on the same day, just the government says coincidentally, the government passed an order in council. So cabinet made a decision that they would create a new corporation for the purpose of managing and investing a portion of Crown assets. To say that that's not related when it happened on the same day, the end of the week before a long weekend, like, something's up. Like, why do we need a new corporation?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what said new corporation is going to do or what their mandate is. I think
we already have a corporation to manage Crown assets.
Well, it's not working.
Well, you don't create a second one. Like, why do we need a second one?
And I don't know. And I know probably where your little tin hats going. I don't know if I'm right, but I'm not going to say it because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
But like, okay, we can say tin hat, but truthfully, like this is the government undermining institutions. This is the government saying these guys can't do it, so we have to think of something different. Like appointing the finance minister and creating a new corporation is not a solution to this. And I think like if you look at this closely and say the government is also saying that they should be managing your CPP. If AIMCo can't manage the assets that AIMCo already has, why on earth would Albertans want the Alberta government to manage their CPP? So I think this is a longer term, like you can say tin hat, but I do think that the government is actively undermining institutions and saying, you know, AIMCo can't do it, so we've got to blow it up and create something new is just a tried and in some cases successful method for conservatives.
I like what you did there. I think that it's more about the fact that where Albertans can go on this is you can shit on how we got there about like the fact that we have an interim that's the finance minister. I'm sure he didn't want that job. He's going through budget process right now. It was probably like, we need to appoint someone to tread water. It sounds as though that's what his scope is going to be. But given the fact that these OCs or these appointments had to happen, again, what would Erica do? I probably would have given notice to all of these board members and the CEO being like, you're not meeting your mandate. Look at the numbers. Like this isn't a month old thing. This is not even just like a few quarters. This is consistently mismanaging. And if we think about how that applies to our household, we would take our money and run. And like as an individual, get it out of mismanagement. What's the value add of this institution? I think they need to hit reset on that. And I hope that that's what the intention is. But again, like you wouldn't do it with your own household savings. So if this is as bad as it the stats are showing about the mismanagement, the ups in operation costs down in Alberta investment, like, no, thank you. Get the dirt toxicity out of here. Let's get good quality people that can manage the money. Can't speak to the other stuff here because I'm not there anymore, but I do support, and I think why it landed better than it maybe would have given the fact I don't think they rolled this out amazingly is because people support it.
No, they
want
don't.
AIMCo. Then tell me why we didn't hear sirens. We saw one day news cycle on this.
Because the government rolled out a press release saying stabilizing AIMCo, which one is misleading. Two, most Albertans don't know what AIMCo is. And they rolled it out right before a long weekend. And there was very little criticism of it, like in terms of media coverage over the weekend. It's not because no one cares and they're supportive.
Well, I haven't seen anything yesterday or today.
But still,
it's no longer like it's not a stat.
But this is the problem, right? And this is what we're talking about in this episode is like it's easy for the government to push through things that look innocuous, but they're consequential. Like saying like we're going to blow up the board of AIMCo and replace it with a new corporation is consequential. The other things that we're talking about today, maybe it doesn't sound exciting for regular Albertans to talk about how the government is going to interfere in the governance of professional bodies. That's consequential. Gerrymandering with the boundaries, consequential, but none of it sounds super buzzworthy.
We're going to end this episode, I think, with that one. But I think you're coming at it, and rightfully so, in a cynical approach. I think when we look at what the motivation is, like, you want to be suspicious of their intention. Sure, criticize the like in the weeds, but AIMCo wasn't working. I'm glad that they're addressing it. Perhaps there's a lot of things within our system we need to evaluate. And Danielle Smith has actually done a good job of being like, I'm the person that's going to make this tough decision. Call it blow it up, call it reform, call it whatever you want. I just appreciate looking at these stats. Like even in my briefings when I was there, I knew that it wasn't like an entity that was like really crushing it. But this is something that it's like for those pensions and those individuals, damn rights I want to see like AIMCo reset, get a new mandate, get the finance minister out of there. That's totally fair. And then let's like move on with what this entity looks like. But I don't think many people are complaining if it does impact you to know that your government is shifting gears and making sure that your money's working for you.
Okay, that's like the top line fluffy press release way to say it, but like you can't just have a government that comes in for 4 years and blows stuff up. Like you actually have to fix the things too.
Well, if it's so broken,
far, we've just you can't just come in and blow everything up. Like we need fixes, and so far the government is just blowing things up and blowing things up and blowing things up. And how is creating a new board or a new corporation for AIMCo a fix? That's not a fix. That's just concentrating power in the premier's office, which they have done all along.
I look at it if something's broken, like this is, let's take a car analogy because I'm such a car buff. This is like changing pipes or a transmission. Like this is a new engine on a machine. Instead of doing what I
How,
think you're
though?
saying is like changing a tire, let's throw money into like a new bumper. Like that is kind of like what I've seen the fix be till this point. And I won't even say just NDP. I think we saw this under even the Kenney administration if they didn't fix it and the numbers go back to 2019. Like, this is the car needs a new engine. Let's put in a new engine. I think that Danielle Smith has the balls that she's going to do it. Now, it does come with political risk, though, right? You blow something up, it could blow up in your face when you go to the polls in 2027. But I appreciate that maybe they're taking these risks, and I suspect a lot of them will have a return on investment. So I'm for
Okay,
it.
but let's just take your car analogy one step further. If you
It was so
want
brutal.
a
I
new
know nothing.
engine in your car, but you still need your car in the interim, you're not going to take the engine out without a new engine waiting for you. And so blowing up
You get a rental
healthcare-
car, courtesy car.
So we're going to have a rental healthcare system, a rental AIMCo. Like this is what I'm saying is like
For
the
30
government's
days.
blowing things up without a plan to have something come in behind it.
But what I've seen to date is putting a bandage on it. And so it's like that didn't work to fix it when the NDP was in power, didn't work when Kenney was there. These numbers go back a decade of like mismanagement. So yeah, when you have 70 band-aids you've put on and they keep coming off,
But if that's the case, Erica, if that's the case where the government is really in a position where they're saying AIMCo's not working, we're going to blow up AIMCo, we're going to completely restructure it, we're going to take a different approach to it. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that announcement. And so if that's the plan, they should be far, far more transparent about what their plan is to manage people's retirement savings.
Yeah, well, no, I'm kidding. And I take your point. I just think, this always, you were saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope AGLC is on this docket because I really don't think that one's working, but that's for another day. In other news, here's one that I really liked was that Danielle Smith announced the government will be bringing in legislation next year. So, we've got some runway that would limit the ability of professional bodies to muzzle their members. Those are my words, not the government's, but let's play a clip to bring our listeners up to speed.
Albertans value free speech, the right to freely express our beliefs without being censored by others, most especially by government. A diversity of opinions and beliefs is one of the hallmarks of a free, healthy, and democratic society. Many of the greatest ideas and advancements in history started out as non-conventional and controversial ideas that became popular and mainstream only after brave women and men were able to convince their fellow citizens of their value.
In a case that many of you may be familiar with, Alberta's own Dr. Jordan Peterson, a licensed Ontario psychologist and world-renowned author and philosopher, is being forced by his regulatory body into social media re-education for controversial political comments he made on Twitter that had nothing to do with his practice as a psychologist and were based on complaints from people who had never been his patients and who he had never met.
Well, I don't think that government legislation should ever point to a single individual. So I would not advise the key message on Jordan Peterson. Yeah, what would Erica do? Not put in her key message as Jordan Peterson. I like that it is freedom of expression. I think there's two examples that really come to mind of how this can impact an individual. And I'm going to use one that I think folks are all familiar with. It is when the former Minister of Health, Tyler Shandro, went and inappropriately went on someone's private property and yelled at them. And I think we've all seen the clips. We know that there should be reprimand for his actions. It should be, recognized that that was not appropriate. That's not how you conduct business. That's not how you have a conversation. I think he learned that lesson. However, within the Law Society, he then had to go through the potential of being disbarred. And I think that that's an example of where this legislation could work in making sure that you're not being penalized for something that maybe is outside of your scope or speaking inappropriately. I'm not giving him a pass on what he did, but I think the fact that then because he is a lawyer, it elevated through the society that he's penalized for something he was doing on his personal time, on a personal situation, standing up for his family. And I think that's something and an example I would say is where this legislation, one of the examples where I think this legislation could actually protect individuals from being penalized professionally for something that is kind of out of scope, not in context of what they were doing within their role or their profession.
But that's basically saying that if you are in one of these trusted positions, so like let's talk about doctors, lawyers, psychologists, people who are in these trusted positions, you're saying like your actions outside of dealing specifically with a patient or a client don't matter. Like I think like if we look at Jordan Peterson, for example, he uses his title, his credentials as a way to bring credibility to the claims that he makes about, claims that are bigoted and sometimes completely inaccurate online. And he uses that title. And that reflects not only on him as a psychologist, but it does reflect on the society. And when Tyler Shandro goes to someone's door and people know he's a lawyer, it reflects on lawyers as well. And so it should be.
But would you not argue in that maybe that's more on politicians as opposed to his legal entity? Like, I'm thinking if an engineer screams at his neighbor and they know he's a PN, like, does that mean that you're
But not every
engineers?
industry governs themselves. Like these organizations are trusted to govern themselves. So like doctors are trusted to govern themselves because why on earth would anyone, like why would the government govern doctors? They govern their own professional conduct. They govern their own standards and credentials. Like they should, because they know the most about it. And so if psychologists or if lawyers say we hold our members, we hold you to a certain standard, we decide what the standard is and we decide when you haven't met it, that makes sense to me.
But and I believe that I agree with that if it's within the scope of them practicing law or practicing medicine. I think that that's where it's getting muddied in the waters, is like, if you're outside of your scope of your profession, I get that, like, we all represent the brands in which we work for. But I think that there's a difference between disbarment and maybe just like addressing the fact that it is wrong, apology, something like that. But it seems like a lot of these are very severe implications for something that, like,
apology. Like they could just.
But he went through an entire disbarment,
as he should. Like no, he went through a hearing. He went through an entire hearing, and
but for the potential of losing his license, which would mean
when you think like a lawyer is supposed to have really incredible judgment, we trust lawyers to have incredible judgment. Tyler Shandro displayed very, very, very poor judgment. And so, yeah, of course, his profession, the profession that he acts on behalf of course they care. And if it was like a regular lawyer without the profile that he had, maybe it would be different. But like he has the profile. People saw he was expected to have incredible judgment and he displayed very poor judgment. Of course, the Law Society would care about that.
But I disagree that it should be the Law Society within. I don't think it blanket represents lawyers as a whole. So maybe that's where we differentiate, but let's maybe shift to physicians, for example. I know that when we did, we talked about this on our podcast when we had the psychiatrist on to talk about the viewpoint of the medical practice, the viewpoint of how people feel or believe. Something else I found very interesting was that the association governs itself, but it also, I think, muzzles people. And what I mean by that is that I had several people reach out that were in the healthcare profession, various healthcare professions, including physicians, that don't support affirming care, that wish that there was a different approach or a different voice from the association because they don't agree with it. They weren't allowed to become public. They weren't allowed to talk on the matter. And I think that that's also limiting the freedom of different perspectives. I think we can all agree on something we don't have enough data on, that if we're only hearing one voice and one voice that doesn't address all 100% of the concerns or different perspectives, that's also limiting our ability to educate ourselves and make the best informed decision for public.
But that's like really taking one specific instance where you talk to someone and torquing it. Like the problem is that most medical advice is not coincidentally in agreement. It's in agreement because the best evidence possible has shown something to be a certain way. And so the majority of professionals agree that it's a certain way. And like, yeah, there can be outliers and there's research going on all the time. And I've never heard any medical association say that that's not encouraged. But when the overwhelming evidence is one way and one person decides to go another way and lean on their credentials to do that, and in some cases, use it to build a platform online, absolutely the medical association should stop them from doing that.
But the medical association isn't also welcoming it. We've seen it from individuals not choosing to practice. We've seen it from individuals recognizing that, like, what information, I can even reference the psychiatrist. I asked him if he's looked overseas, if the association is looking at international data. And he said, he basically said he doesn't know or no. And this is the thing, is like, the best data can be, we know how surveys work. Like, you can make
Erica,
data a
come
certain
on.
way.
A
Yeah,
survey is not
seriously.
the same as in-depth medical research.
Well, then why, when they get pointed to different medical research, they're not coming out and recognizing it?
one
I don't
study
understand why
means
you're not
nothing.
allowed to go out there.
One
I don't know
study
why
means
people
nothing.
couldn't go
Like, of
out. And
course
I'm not saying going out and yelling about COVID or any of that stuff. I just mean being able to have a voice and not be penalized for feeling
But
like you can speak up.
because you-
Or outside of that, if a medical doctor is a dick on an airplane, like, do we need to penalize them in the sense of being a medical physician?
But it's up to the medical professionals to decide that. What is the conduct we expect of our members, and what is the consequence if you don't uphold that conduct? That is not for the government to decide. That's for the members to decide. And if there is conclusive evidence,
in to the membership, like, I
if
know
there
that
is
there's places you have to be a member in order to practice that. If you don't agree with the beliefs, shouldn't you then be able to opt out or
Well,
opt in?
But there has to be a standard across the profession. It can't just be like every person makes up their own standards.
So
Otherwise, we'd have tons of.
How do we ensure that people are all being heard and listened to? And with, like, the inclusive side, I don't see is currently happening in those associations.
That is the job of the association. That is the job
So
of
what
the
do you
association.
do when the association doesn't represent their members?
But I think overwhelmingly the associations do represent their members. And there is a quiet minority of people who, when they don't like that their views that can't be proven through science are not supported by the association, they get upset. And that's fine. That is totally fine.
I don't know if I agree that it's a silent minority or a loud minority. I think that there's a discontent generally in the public that, like, your ability to speak, your ability to have an opinion, your ability to
But it doesn't matter what the public thinks.
But are they not members of the public? Like, why
No, but-
why is the law moving or the rules moving for individuals? If I am a lawyer and I'm not lawyering, I'm not practicing law, like, why does it matter what I do in my own public time or what my opinion might be on a issue or a contentious thought, right? I think we're limiting by having the associations dictate or nanny state what people can say in 100% of their lives versus what they say in a courtroom. I don't think that's fair.
I am so glad that professional associations exist, because I want to know that when a doctor gives me advice, that it is 100% based in evidence and fact and truth. And part of the problem here is that the government says it won't police truth, that there is no longer an official version of the truth. But when it comes to things like medicine, when it comes to things like science, when it comes to things like law, there is, in fact, in many cases, one truth, or like overwhelming agreement in evidence. And the UCP just doesn't see it that way.
Case law exists for a reason. Continued research exists for a reason. You're saying it like it's black and white, and things move. People learn more. Ideas change. And I think what we're seeing in society right now is a desire to, like, limit that. I'm challenging the current state.
The challenge has never not existed. We work from what we have, and we continue to evolve based on the science. You don't just say, like, one day, I think we should use ivermectin as a COVID-19 antigen, and because I thought this was a good idea, now this should be trusted medical advice. Like, that is why the association is in place. There can always be people who want to veer off track, and I want to know that the association is only endorsing those who are completely grounded in evidence and fact.
But I think there is those groups. I get your point on taking it to, like, the extreme. I think that is an extreme case, but we are seeing individuals on a lot of issues come forward. There is collective groups. I mean, I hear all the time that, like, certain people speaking for the AMA are not speaking for those physicians. In many groups, we've seen the AMA's association come out against itself when it was a rural medicine announcement. You saw them say, like, we don't feel represented, that the AMA as a whole is trying to, like, undermine them. So I think that there's a challenge within those associations. I don't think, I don't have a line of sight into the operations, but I do hear the pressure points. I do hear the concerns. And I think it's important that maybe we look at how associations listen and engage with their members. Not that I think that it should be a government thing. This isn't about the government. This is about the government putting the parameters to allow for freedom of speech, freedom of opinion. And I think there's a lot of people that don't feel that exists in today's society. And that goes not just in Alberta, I think it's across our country and frankly, the world.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you want to have a discussion where your opinion differentiates with your friends, go for it. But when we have people using massive platforms and leaning on their credentials to bring credibility to the arguments that are in some cases immediately disproven, then I think we have a problem. And basically what the government has just brought in is to say whatever you want, wherever you want, no matter what the damage is to people. It's totally fine here. Freedom of speech.
But I think you're trying to make it like everyone's Jordan Peterson. I think it's fear that you can't talk about things on Facebook because people are going to whistle blow you or nanny state you. You can't say something in the comfort of a friend's home because someone might record you. I think these types of things and that lack of people being in a vulnerable situation and sharing is going to bite them in the ass for their career. I don't think it is someone coming online and always using a huge platform. I think it's about an average individual having a conversation, not thinking that they shouldn't have their guard up in every conversation they have. They can express how they truly feel without reprimands on their profession. And
I think that sounds a lot nicer. It sounds a lot nicer.
What would Erica do? Key message to government that way.
But truthfully, I think why this is worrisome is that we have this government for sure has basically said facts don't exist. Your truth is your truth. There is no agreed facts any longer. And what this does is basically take the medical and legal and whatever other professions that govern themselves and say, you who have governed truth for a really long time now can no longer govern truth either. And so we're all just going to believe what we believe and we're going to go from there. And that's just going to lead to the division that we already see. That's going to lead to governments sharing misinformation and disinformation and zero progress and making professions like law and medicine less safe.
And I know we got to move on to boundaries where I know we're also going to agree that I think that where you're looking at it is from the cynic point of view. I don't think that you would ever look at a UCP policy and not come at it with that critical side of things. I don't expect you not to. That's why we have these conversations. But I also look at it as what about those voices that don't feel heard, that are quote unquote trapped or muzzled in these associations? So I think that it's good to have this type of opportunity for people to speak. I don't think it should influence this radical change in any way. And I don't think that's what the government is doing. But I want to ask you, because this is something your government did in 2017. And now the UCP, as all governments do within 10 years, reassess boundaries and population distribution. We are getting, as announced by the government, 2 new ridings in Alberta. So what are your initial thoughts?
Again, a press release that the government released, Alberta gets 2 new ridings. That is not the story here. That is the story that the government wants you to hear. But there's a lot of what looks like gerrymandering going on here.
Well, I think you're crazy. I saw that in the show notes. I thought it was funny. You wrote it, so I'm saying it. For everyone, Cheryl does the heavy lifting of making sure that I kind of stay on time and that we're organized. She usually has to bring us back, as you all know, that I can talk on a tangent. Speaking of which, 2 new ridings. I was for example, the interesting thing is when you say it's 2 new ridings, it's this, we just rolled those out federally, and Alberta has 3 new federal ridings, and those are about 108,000 proportions. So I don't see how 3 federally is gerrymandering with 2 provincially. They're just starting that process. I'm not against 2 new ridings. Alberta's population hate Alberta.
Has
you
grown.
want us to stay at 87.
I think it's great to add 2 new ridings in downtown Edmonton and
Strathcona doubles.
No, but really, Alberta's population has grown. Obviously, the riding should grow with it. What I'm worried about here is what's in the details of the bill, which no one has said anything about. So last month, the UCP introduced a bill that basically changes the Boundaries Commission's Act, tells the Boundaries Commission what they should look at when they draw new boundaries. And previously, the bill had said the commission must pay special attention to municipal boundaries. So wherever possible, keep ridings within municipal boundaries. So that means like Calgary seats are Calgary seats, Lethbridge seats are Lethbridge seats. In the Justice Statutes Amendment Act, which again, meant to sound really boring and lump this in with a whole bunch of other stuff, the government is proposing to remove all of those considerations. So that would mean mushing rural seats in with city seats, which obviously gives the UCP a much better chance of winning those seats. So it tells me two things. One, that there's a bunch of gerrymandering with the boundaries going on. And two, that the UCP is very worried about their city seats, because this would be consequential not just in Calgary, where they're worried about holding on to those suburban seats, but in places like Lethbridge, in places like Medicine Hat, in Red Deer, in places where right now we have seats that sit inside the municipal boundaries.
Okay, so one question. I don't know the answer to this. I tried to find it. When was that put into place? Like, I think this has been around for like longer than both of us have been involved in politics, right? Like the repeal isn't something the NDP put in or anything like that. Anyways, just it was like kind of food for thought, because I was like, when did this actually come in? Now, interestingly, we go down memory lane, and I understand what you're saying. However, argument could be made that in 2017, you moved 3 rural ridings to form something like Banff Kananaskis, where you have Banff, the Kananaskis area, Canmore, which, if I was being a critic, I could say was a far more progressive riding, playing to your advantage. Same with putting Airdrie Cochrane together.
But let's
as
be
opposed to
clear
Cochrane
about how
Banff.
this happens. It's not like the government writes the boundaries. It's not like the government draws the boundaries. It's an independent commission, which
Right.
I will say under the NDP was independent. And so if those ridings ended
And
up
they
together,
always are.
yeah, but I'm not
So
saying
where's
the
your
boundaries. I've said
argument
really
then?
clearly where my argument is. It's not that the Boundaries Commission is not independent. It's that the government is actively changing the scope of the commission. It's saying your job before was to do this and make sure that municipal ridings are protected.
And
Now they're saying, do whatever you want. We can completely ignore the municipal boundaries.
So I'm involved federally. We just did this, changed boundaries, moved part of St. Albert that had St. Albert and Edmonton because of boundary distribution. Like, this isn't going to be some like, aha, gotcha moment. You got to be on population. You've got to be reassessing where population has grown. I think we can all agree Edmonton and Calgary and the urban centers always see growth. So I do suspect, though, but let me put it to you. Would you think that someone that lives in West Henday, so the west end of Edmonton, when they're wanting to be represented by an MLA, would have maybe more alignment with part of St. Albert? Or if we're looking at like south part of Edmonton or the north, touching Sherwood Park, that there wouldn't make sense as opposed to having more rural in there? Wouldn't you think that like that could also be how the cookie crumbles, and that like
No.
as someone that lived in West Henday, I'm more aligned with St. Albert than I would be with like, I don't know, like another city like Legal or something that's outside that already currently touches it. So I think that there is, again, an independent commission that could look at that. They could look at how do we move this jigsaw puzzle to ensure that there's equal. And I also think alignment of what those community values are. We've seen a lot of times where it's a small amount of the city and a huge amount of rural. And I think that like sometimes that misrepresents then what those constituents want. So I would argue, I think one, math is math. They're going to have to find the population in those numbers. Two, we have so many suburban surroundings that I think that there's benefit in reevaluating how you look at it.
You know what I think it is? I think that it's very clear in no matter where you look that there is a growing rural-urban divide, and that cities have been overwhelmingly voting one way and rural seats have been overwhelmingly voting another way. This was true in Alberta's last election to an extent. This was true in Saskatchewan's last election. If you look in the states, it was true in almost every single state. I'm sure it was true in every state where you have, cities voting more progressive and the rural seats voting more conservative. And I think as the UCP has moved their party further and further to the right, they know that they're risking those city seats. They know that they're risking those suburban Calgary seats. They know that they're risking the places like Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and Red Deer. And so by saying, let's redraw the boundaries and let's just say municipal boundaries do not matter anymore, obviously Lethbridge County votes a much different way than Lethbridge City. It gives them a much better chance of holding those seats in the next election. And that is what I think Albertans should be worried about.
So the interesting thing, though, is we both know the process. It has an independent commission or a committee that goes through it. Then it goes to public hearings.
Maybe the UCP will
then
blow
it goes
up.
to parliamentarians. Well, we're not there yet, Cheryl.
Not yet.
If that happens, I'm sure that you'll say blow up, I'll say reform, and we'll carry on. But to my point is that that means that you don't trust the process also, because if it goes through all of these things, the committee can make recommendations, the public hearing, and then the parliamentarians, they can decide against it. I think that the thing that I'm trying to get across is you can't pull the rug over or out from under all of these people that are in this independent process. And it is a numbers game, and it is based on population and density growth. So I don't think that that's fair to assume that in 3 years from now, the UCP is going to not be able to see a change of boundaries within our major urban centers. I think that's inevitable. They're not just going to make something down in Rocky Mountain House and just have like two ridings down there. You can't
I just
do
think
that.
like so far the UCP has proven that they don't care about rules, that they don't care. They're willing to change anything. They're willing to blow anything up. And so, maybe under normal circumstances, you could say, listen, I have faith that the independent commission will figure this out. I don't, because I just don't think that the UCP has shown any interest in sticking to current rules or protocols.
So Cheryl doesn't trust the UCP or like them. Is there anything you like? Like, is there one thing that you've liked that the UCP has done? I think I think that there's good pieces within that Justice
This is like
Amendment
the end
Act.
of the leaders debate when it's like, say one nice thing about the other leader. And you know what? I really like the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I think it's great.
Keeps crushing it. I just hear announcements after announcements. So that was nice of you. Is that it? Are we done?
That's it.
Amazing. Well, this is our week 2 back. Clearly, I don't know how to manage time, so I asked Cheryl if we're done. Reminder that this drops every Thursday at 5 a.m. And so like and subscribe.
And that's on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
I totally stole that line from you.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram at The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.